Hey there, and welcome to your favorite history channel, where we bring you the most fascinating stories about the most remarkable events, landmarks, establishments, and personalities in history. In today's video, we'll be detailing the history of one of the most unfortunate events to ever occur in human history, the Pearl Harbor attack, and the extent and cost of the damage caused. But before we go into details of this historical event, kindly support this channel by giving this video a like, hit the subscribe button, and smash the notification bell to receive notifications of when we post more enthralling historical videos like this one. Do leave us a comment as well, as we'd love to read your opinion on why you think the Japanese orchestrated the attack and if the US reprisal attack at the Battle of Midway was enough recompense for the heinous war crimes that Japan committed at Pearl Harbor. On the morning of the 7th of December 1941, at 7:48 a.m. local time, 177 aircraft of the Imperial Japanese Navy launched a surprise attack on the United States naval base at Pearl Harbor on the island of Oahu, Hawaii. Their intent was to destroy and damage as much of the US Pacific Fleet as possible, before it could respond to Japanese operations taking place on the same day against British, Dutch, and US territories in Southeast Asia. Since early 1941, the US had been supplying Great Britain in its fight against the Nazis. It had also been pressuring Japan to halt its military expansion in Asia and the Pacific. The first attack wave began with the bombing of the hangars and parked aircraft of the island's airfields, while at the same time, torpedoes were launched against the US warships moored in the harbor. In the first 5 minutes of the attack, 4 battleships were hit, including the USS Oklahoma and the USS Arizona. Minutes later, the Arizona exploded after a bomb hit its gunpowder stores, sinking the ship and killing 1,177 of its crew. This devastating attack was followed an hour later by a second wave of 163 Japanese aircraft. Within 2 hours, 21 US warships had been sunk or damaged, 188 aircraft destroyed, and 2,403 American servicemen and women killed, including 68 civilians, and another 1,178 Americans sustained injuries of varying degrees. With the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, the US could no longer avoid an active fight. So on December 8th, US President Franklin Delano Roosevelt asked Congress for and received a declaration of war against Japan. In response, Germany and Italy, allied with Japan, declared war on the US on December 11th. With these actions, the United States had officially entered World War II. Although the attack on Pearl Harbor was a surprise, Japan and the United States had been edging towards war for decades. The United States was particularly unhappy with Japan's increasingly aggressive attitude towards China. The Japanese government believed that the only way to solve its economic and demographic problems was to expand into its neighbor's territory and take over its import market. To actualize this, Japan declared war on China in 1937, resulting in the Nanking Massacre and other atrocities. The US responded to this aggression with a battery of economic sanctions and trade embargoes, reasoning that without access to money and goods, and especially essential supplies like oil, Japan would have to pull back on its expansionist agenda. Instead, the sanctions made the Japanese more determined to stand their ground, and during the months of negotiations that followed between Tokyo and Washington, D.C., neither side would budge, and it was clear that war was all but inevitable. Japanese Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto conceived the Pearl Harbor attack, and Captain Minoru Genda planned it. Two things reportedly inspired Yamamoto's Pearl Harbor idea. First was a prophetic book he'd read, and the second was a yearning for a historic attack. The book was The Great Pacific War, written in 1925 by Hector Bywater, a British naval authority. It was a realistic account of a clash between the United States and Japan that begins with the Japanese destruction of the US fleet, and followed by a Japanese attack on Guam and the Philippines. So when Britain's Royal Air Force successfully attacked the Italian fleet at Taranto on November 11, 1914, Yamamoto was convinced that Bywater's fiction could become reality. Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, is located near the center of the Pacific Ocean and is roughly 2,000 miles from the US mainland and about 4,000 miles from Japan. No one believed that the Japanese would start a war with an attack on the distant islands of Hawaii. American intelligence officials were very confident that any Japanese attack would take place in one of the nearby European colonies in the South Pacific, such as the Dutch East Indies, Singapore, or Indochina. And because American military leaders were not expecting an attack so close to home, the naval facilities at Pearl Harbor were largely undefended. Almost the entire Pacific Fleet was moored around Ford Island in the harbor, and hundreds of airplanes were squeezed onto adjacent airfields. Another pointer to this was that on December 6, 1941, the US intercepted a Japanese message that inquired about ship movements and berthing positions at Pearl Harbor. The cryptologist gave the message to her supervisor, who rather than launch an immediate inquiry, chose to delay taking action until she get back to work on Monday, December 8th. Additionally, on Sunday, the December 7th, a radar operator on Oahu saw a large group of airplanes on his screen heading towards the island, and immediately called his superior, who told him it was probably a group of US B-17 bombers and not to worry about it. The Japanese plan was simple: destroy the Pacific Fleet. That way, America would not be able to fight back as Japan's armed forces spread across the South Pacific. So, on December 7th, after a month of planning and practice, the Japanese launched their attack. In all, the Japanese strike force consisted of 353 aircraft launched from 4 heavy carriers. These included 40 torpedo planes, 103 level bombers, 131 dive bombers, and 79 fighters. The attack also consisted of 2 heavy cruisers, 35 submarines, 2 light cruisers, 9 oilers, 2 battleships, and 11 destroyers. As the attack began, Japanese Captain Mitsuo Fushida sent the code message "Tora Tora Tora" to the Japanese fleet after flying over Oahu to indicate the Americans had been caught by surprise. The Japanese had planned to give the US a declaration of war before the attack began, so they would not violate the first article of the Hague Convention of 1907. But the message was delayed and not relayed to the US officials in Washington until the attack was already in progress. At 10 minutes past 8, a 1,800-pound bomb smashed through the deck of the battleship USS Arizona and landed in her forward ammunition magazine. The ship exploded and sank with more than 1,000 men trapped inside. Investigations revealed that half of the dead at Pearl Harbor were on the Arizona. But the Japanese had failed to cripple the Pacific Fleet as the fleet's carriers were away from the base on December 7th. The Pearl Harbor assault also left the base's most vital onshore facilities, such as oil storage depots, repair shops, shipyards, and submarine docks, intact. As a result, the US Navy was able to rebound relatively quickly from the attack and launch a reprisal attack. The Japanese lost 29 aircraft and 5 midget submarines in the attack. 1 Japanese soldier was taken prisoner and 129 Japanese soldiers were killed. When Admiral Yamamoto learned that his forces had not destroyed the US aircraft carriers or completely destroyed the US fleet, he feared that the United States, with its enormous industrial potential, would soon recover and fight back. The United States did recover, and quicker than Yamamoto could have imagined. After only 6 months, the US carrier fleet dealt a decisive blow to Yamamoto's navy in June 1942 at the Battle of Midway, sinking 4 Japanese aircraft carriers. After this US victory came the start of the US campaign that ultimately culminated in the defeat of the Japanese Empire in August 1945 and essentially ended the Second World War. Out of all the Japanese ships that participated in the attack on Pearl Harbor, only one, the Ushio, survived until the end of the war, before it was eventually surrendered to the US at the Yokosuka Naval Base. After the Pearl Harbor attack, and for the first time during years of discussion and debate, the American people were united in their determination to go to war. Following the attack on Pearl Harbor, the beautiful island of Hawaii was a mess, and as the sun set, the skyline was a massive fireball with people working through the night to try to find survivors and put out the flames. At the same time, they were all very wary that another attack may be imminent, so they prepared the area as best they could. A massive cleanup effort commenced, and all across America, soldiers, Marines, and sailors offered to go to Pearl Harbor to help constitute rescue parties and salvage crews, working 24 hours a day and 7 days a week in an attempt to restore the region in quick time. Although the exact cost of restoring the harbor isn't public knowledge, experts have estimated that the restoration cost hundreds of millions of dollars, or somewhere close to $1 billion. 1 year after the attack, with the harbor still choked with wreckage, the harbor would only be fully restored to a much better state 2 years after the Japanese sneak attack. Many of these ships were repaired and fought in later battles, and crucially, all 3 of the Pacific Fleet's aircraft carriers were not at Pearl Harbor during the attack and so escaped damage. They were to prove vital in the coming Pacific campaign.